Hello, guys and gals, me Mutahar, and 2 weeks ago I looked at an application called the T app. Now, for anybody that doesn't remember, the T app was effectively this little dating check app that women were downloading so they could talk unfiltered stuff about any of the red flag men that they could find in the world. Now, obviously, I talked about this application, I looked into its terms of services, and I would be completely real with you, ladies and gentlemen. I think that it is a landmine of litigations that could happen. Obviously, the biggest thing that came out of it was in pretty much record time, the actual application seemed to be hacked, and there was a lot of information that leaked out. 4chan had gigabytes upon gigabytes of people's driver's licenses. They had their selfies, and it was just out there for the world to download. In fact, it was so out there that obviously people took this information and unfortunately, for a very short-lived while, took that information and made entire maps pointing out where these people were actually going and living at based on the information that was spilled from the T app. Now, of course, obviously, this even bled into an entire battleground, the T-Spill website, which isn't really available. They would take the selfies of these various women, and they would say, hey, click on the Floyd you prefer. And that's just pretty much how things kind of went. It was pretty bad, or especially if you were caught in this massive spillage of your safety, really, of your personal information. So this is one of the reasons why, like I always say, it's probably best we don't have, ID verification, because generally speaking, it seems like some of the biggest applications, this one was, I think, number one at the time. If it wasn't taking care of your, personal information, I would say that a good chunk of services like this don't necessarily do the same. So why are we talking about T? Well, according to the title, we now got the guy version of the app, guys. TeaOnHer. And you know what's really funny? Well, they say flattery is like the perfect, like imitation is a perfect form of flattery. Well, this application not only imitates down to an art form, but it also imitates the security flaws. If you are a dumb guy that signed up for this, congratulations, your driver's license got fucking leaked. So, of course, obviously, I wanted to get the application. I unfortunately couldn't get the app on my Android phone. I guess us Android people are just fucking brokies. So I decided to dig out the old iPhone and download the application. So inside my iPhone over here, if I go to the old App Store and I just go to the search, I type in the words TeaOnHer, and this is actually available in Canada, despite the fact that as a Canadian, I actually don't think I can access the website. But it's made by this company called Newville Media Corporation, which we'll look at later. It's apparently in the United States like number 2, even though it's number 9 in Canada. It's actually crazy how fast these apps sort of blow up. Now, of course, if you're looking at the actual, site over here, they've got whole things about community profiles. I love this comment. Not gonna lie, I don't know if this falls into bullying. Probably slander. Don't worry, buddy. We're not gonna have to think of a lot of slander once we get to the sign up. So obviously, you go to the sign up page for this, and I gave it an email address, which was obviously a burner. I gave it I gave it every information that was a burner. And of course, I reached this screen. Identity verification. So right over here, it asks me for a driver's license, a passport, a state ID, a military ID, and a selfie. Now, obviously, motherfucker, I ain't gonna provide that, given that this app is breached. Now, if I dig out my driver's license, for instance, ladies and gentlemen, I think all of us have it. If you don't have a driver's license, probably have a state ID or something. My driver's license consists of my full name. It also consists of my actual home address, which I would not obviously want for the entire world to just easily access and see. And holy crap, am I expired? Oh no, that's issuing date. Okay, thank God. I thought I had an expired license for a hot minute there. That wouldn't have been good. But yeah, I wouldn't want this information floating around. Unfortunately, for anybody that's signed onto this website, you had your information given up. So I want to go into their website and just look at their privacy policy. So for instance, if you scroll to the data security and protection, I'm going to show you the biggest load of ChatGPT bullshit you've ever seen. We implement robust security measures to protect your info. Industry standard encryption for data transmission. Secure cloud infrastructure. Wait until you see how this shit was hacked. Regular security audit. There was not a security audit done on this. Limited employee access to personal information. I think they only have the employee. Verification photos stored in secure unencrypted storage and account protection through secure authentication. So how do we know it's actually hacked, ladies and gentlemen? Well, a whole bunch of security researchers, I think the guys over at Malwarebytes kind of looked into it. But this whole thing was kind of broken by the guys over at TechCrunch, and I want to just give, the man his flowers. Obviously, our buddy Zach Whitaker, who is the security writer there, actually looked into a lot of this application. He actually went into a subdomain for the TeaOnHer app. So at the time when I was actually analyzing this website, this actual site didn't exist. But of course, what was accessible was their app server domain. Now, obviously, things have been cleaned up since then, but obviously, at the time, Zach had noticed that there were some glaring flaws. So, for instance, pulling up this actual, back-end page, they were exposed to, obviously, the site's documentations, which is kind of like a roadmap on how to use an API, right? Now, sometimes a site will have this accessible, but usually you would expect that for administrator things, the API wouldn't be freely accessible and just used, right? Without any form of password protection or credentials. Unfortunately, using the API, they were able to unironically pull out actual driver's licenses and selfies for the users that signed up to this website. So for instance, these individuals from Massachusetts and Texas both signed up. And like I said, the one thing that I wouldn't want floating out there would be my actual home address. Things that are pretty important, things that you probably generally want to keep private. And of course, in amongst all of this, selfies were obviously leaked. Now to go back to TeaOnHer as a website, obviously one of the things that I think is worth doing is kind of going in and seeing just what this website effectively does consist of. So to go back to my phone, the kind of stuff that was posted here, and we can get a little glimpse of it through the actual guest mode. They actually have a guest mode as opposed to the T app where you actually do need to sign up and get fucking verified completely. So I signed up for this application. And of course, down over here, it has, again, an error. It says, I cannot connect to Truth Talk servers. Actually, at the time of filming this right now, literally 20 minutes ago, I was able to access. Now it says, unable to connect to Truth Talk servers. Please check your internet connection. And I absolutely do have a functioning internet connection. So yeah, this is getting taken down literally in real time. But to give you a quick idea, before I had actually recorded this, there was just basically people sharing photographs of individuals. Obviously, I assume without their consent. And then, of course, some shit underneath it that would just be the red flag in question for that person. So again, it's one of those applications that you kind of have to be a little bit, watchful for. Now, even the guys over at TeaOnHer said that Apple is currently reviewing this T-space category. So even Apple's trying to figure out how the fuck this shit should work. But I think a big problem for this ultimately does rely on Apple a little bit. So Apple has this walled garden thing where in order to install applications on your iPhone, you have to go through their storefront, as opposed to the guys over at Android. Now, Apple kind of says that they do a lot of shit, they want to make sure that their users are safe. And I just don't understand how Apple could even let this happen where a user made an application that was so insecure that pulling the information wouldn't even be considered hacking, in my opinion, or anybody else's opinion, especially when it's just publicly accessible. Now, according to Zach, even the actual administrator panel let to the actual users Gmail. So this is the administrator, the person who owns this application's actual email address. And unfortunately, I'm not making this up. Now, what kind of a super secret password would this fucking brainchild have? Password 1 equal, exclamation mark. Now, you go to a website and it's always make sure you put in a capital letter, a symbol. Make sure you don't repeat. Bro, this is why. This is it. This has to, in some way, if this isn't real, I almost believe this is a 4chan troll to fuck with us. It has to just be avant-garde art to mess around with the user base, thinking that somebody got hacked, when in reality it's This is just like a troll to get a bunch of dumb dudes to send their information and have it entirely leaked. And here's the really scary part of it, right? Because we live in the day of ID verification, again, one of the things that really is scary about this is that, now you've got a whole bunch of IDs and selfies that are also attached with those IDs floating around on the internet for anybody to download. So for a lot of places that require age verification, somebody that is smart, and I'm not condoning this by any imagination, but somebody that, would want to conceal their information could just download a perfectly valid driver's license from any of these leaks associated with that selfie and just use it in lieu of their own information. And again, I don't promote this. I don't advocate for it. It is actually identity theft, as per my understanding. So, unfortunately, these guys have given, people access to people access to like just easily downloadable identification so they can use in lieu of actual verification. Now, the thing is, obviously, the guys over at TechCrunch kind of even like told, Lampkin, the guy that was running this actual application, if they could even they gave him like this stuff fully well in advance to tell them, hey, listen, you have a security breach. So even Lampkin's like, you must have confused us with the T-app. We hadn't. We don't have a security breach or data leak. It did. We have some bots at most, but we haven't scaled big enough to be in the conversation. Sorry you were misinformed. We weren't. I mean, just the snarky response back is so fucking aggravating. But one of the things that people kind of accuse these applications for is being like vibe coded. Now, for anybody that doesn't know the concept of like vibe coding, so to speak, right? It's this new style of coding where you basically get like an LLM to do things for you. So for instance, right over here, you have an application that, this is Hello World for anybody that doesn't know. Now, this is written in C++, and obviously this is the, program's main function, spitting out the words Hello World. So if I ran this application, you could see that it literally just spits out Hello World. Now, let's say that you wanted to write an application that multiplied a number that the user provided by itself. So how would you as a user do that? Well, first things first, you would probably want to have a number initialized, a number that the application requests. So you would probably feed it like a double, which would be, I don't know, like num or something like that, like number or whatever. And of course, at this moment in time, you could just, define that value. So obviously now the next thing you want to do is you want to ask the user, hey, can you give me a number? So you ask the program to spit out the words, can you give me a number to multiply by itself? And then of course, colon, and you hit enter on that, right? You make that statement. So the next stage is obviously you ask the user, hey, give me that number. So you ask it to input the number right here, which is what cin does. So now you can calculate the answer for that. So you can calculate again in another value, which would be the answer value. And of course, that would be equal to that number that the user provided multiplied by itself. Now there's cleaner ways to write this, but this just makes it more readable for the audience watching. So now you ask the console, it's like, you tell it finally spit out that result. So it spits out the result is, and then of course colon, you add a little space just to make it look cleaner. And then of course you then spit out the actual result, which would be answer. And then of course you can end that line. And of course, because we want to get, the actual final answer, because we actually want to see like the end of this program running, return that as 0. So now if we play this, you can see that, whoa, it asks me for, a number. So if I give it 2, the answer should be 4. Now, of course, if I do, 10, for instance, the answer should be 100. And lo, right here, the answer is 10 to 100. Now, obviously, this is just writing out a little bit of code, and you might be like, why did you go through all this effort? What is the point? The point is, for vibe coders, you can just tell a program like ChatGPT or like a service, hey, write me that program, like I just explained what I wanted. And here it is, it provided me the code. So a vibe coder will take that, code and just decide to, ultimately spit this in and hit that, build and compile. And of course, it does the same thing. Now, the big difference, obviously, is, in one way, I kind of walked you through how each line of code functions. In the other manner, somebody just programmed this through an LLM. And the thing is obviously they don't really, if you don't know what you're coding in, you probably could leave a potential error. Like imagine if instead of doubles, the ChatGPT gave you integers. So if somebody put in like a value of like 2.2, for instance, if I go over here back to the code, and I gave it the number like 4.5, it would absolutely make a mistake, because that data value, if ChatGPT or any other LLM spit that out, it would give you an improper value. And even if you changed it somewhere else down the road, like double, for instance, later, you would go in and you would give it 4.5, it would still be an error, because the actual initial value doesn't necessarily take that, decimal in. But if we changed it, obviously from the beginning, if we knew what the error was, we could then give it a real number and it would spit out the appropriate result. The reason I'm saying it is sometimes when it comes to dealing with LLMs, there are mistakes any model can make. And obviously, the more complicated an application can become, the more mistakes that can occur. Now, obviously, the T app or the TeaOnHer app is significantly more complicated and it requires more parts than what these LLMs do. But the thing about these LLMs is they will spit out functional code, but the thing is, it's up to you to verify if that code doesn't contain a lot of default, if that code doesn't contain any security vulnerabilities, which it seems TeaOnHer absolutely did. So not to say that this application was vibe coded, but given how haphazardly the security was handled, there's reason enough to think maybe at some point the actual user behind it, the creator, didn't really put much effort into verifying if this code actually worked. And really the blame should be on this person. They should have notified users of a breach. They shouldn't have ignored these warnings. And ultimately it also should have been on Apple's doorstep for allowing their users to get absolutely hammered like this, at least from any application that is taking their personal information, something like a driver's license, and not storing it properly. But yeah, ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, we have two apps, the T app for the women and the TeaOnHer app for the guys. And nothing screams equality like both sides getting their personal information completely hijacked, taken advantage of, and now they probably should be calling up like, a bunch of services to make sure that nobody is actually thieving their identity, because ultimately, we don't know who else other than TechCrunch maybe had access to this information. Given that it was sitting so unsecured, somebody else could have been pilfering through this information while this application was live. And it was live, I believe, for like 12 days. So if somebody did use this application, in a meaningful manner to post red flags about, a woman or something, and they did give their actual information, that person could in theory have, their selfies, they could in theory have some of the most personal stuff stolen. Look, moral of the story is this, okay? Fuck tea, let's just sip on some coffee instead, and before you give your driver's license to any fucking website under the sun, if you don't trust YouTube, if you don't trust a lot of big tech companies, and I think that it's okay not to trust companies with any of your information like that, but if you're the same kind of person that has that belief, and you're dumb enough to give your information to this, you kind of honestly in some way deserve what's coming to you, okay? You deserve to learn some hard lessons at some point, as sad as that sounds. Now, the other thing is, it's also a little bit, it hurts my head to think that people are just willing to give their personal information away, especially in the age of vibe coding, when so many security flaws, so many issues exist that cause people ultimately to lose their information because a developer or a team entirely doesn't do anything to make sure that basic security, and I mean very basic security, is met. Ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mudahar, and if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it, I am out.